Hey everybody, Justin here, and here I am to review you High Score Girl, which is on Netflix in Japan. I'm not sure if it's streaming outside of it, but this is pretty much how I watched it. So for those of you who grew up in the 1990s, Street Fighter pretty much brought the arcades back to life in the early part of the 90s, more specifically Street Fighter 2. And of course, though arcades have been dying the last couple of decades, for a long time they were sustained in Japan. And unfortunately, especially due to the scamdemic, arcades have been slowing, an unfortunate dying death in Japan. And of course, just not just the games, but of course the culture. Instead of, say, playing a Street Fighter game, they're now being replaced with stupid ass crane games where you can just win teddy bears or figures of Attack on Titan, free run and whatnot. Nothing wrong with those anime, but I want to play an actual arcade game and not a crane game where I can lose lots of money and not get a goddamn toy, which I could easily buy down the street a book off for this 500 yen and whatnot. So yeah. The two main leads are Akira and Haruo. So Haruo is a boy who just, loves to play Street Fighter at the arcades, and he's a pretty dominant player, especially as Guile. And, and then one day his reign is challenged by Akira, a rich girl who's pretty much like a silent protagonist. And despite being from different worlds and Akira playing behind her parents' back when they play video games, they do form not only just a rivalry, but a very unique relationship themselves through video games, specifically playing Street Fighter 2. So not only is Street Fighter 2 part of the storyline, but other games like Final Fight and of course Haruo, he's a big fan of the PC Engine. And I think what this anime does a good job of showcasing is the PC Engine. So outside of Japan, in North America and Europe and probably South America, the 16-bit wars was largely between the Sega Genesis or the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo. But in Japan, the 16-bit wars was between, the Super Nintendo and the PC Engine, and the PC Engine was released in the U.S. as the TurboGrafx 16. I'm not sure if that was true in Europe, but if you're from those particular territories, you can probably highlight that yourself. So the TurboGrafx 16 or the PC Engine was a big deal in Japan. And I kind of really like how High Score Girl portrays that, not just for its domestic audience, but for a non-Japanese audience as well. It's like, wow, this was really a big system. And thanks to this particular anime, it got me interested in collecting PC Engine games, and you can finally easily find them in Akihabara. And in recent years, unfortunately, especially in the post-pandemic tourism boom, some of the PC Engine games have gone up exponentially. But just like how Nintendo and Sega made their own mini versions of the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and the Genesis or Mega Drive, Konami, which bought the original Hudson Soft that made the PC Engine, they made their own PC Engine TurboGrafx 16 Mini, and I bought that as well. I think that's the only mini console they personally own, but unfortunately I took that back to the US where my brothers have it. But I still have some HuCard games loaded to my Retro-Free console. But yeah, if you want, let's say the art style isn't the best, the most appealing. It's very childish, but it tells a really good nostalgic story, especially if you grew up in this particular era. It doesn't matter if you're from Japan. You grew up in an era when arcades were still a thing, and if you're someone who grew up going to the arcades like I did, enjoyed arcade gaming, especially in the 1990s, then High Score Girl will take you back to that place. And you kind of do get and of course the relationship between Haruo and Akira is also very fun to watch. Akira is a very secluded rich girl, and even though she doesn't speak, you sometimes through her playing and just how she reacts to Haruo, you do see that they have a very special connection and friendship, thanks to this particular style of gaming. No, some people probably overanalyze. I wouldn't say she's on the spectrum or anything like that. It's just, a storytelling tactic, and it just kind of shows that, like, hey, sometimes you don't need to express a character through words or her interactions through words, just through actions and reactions. That's just all there is to it, and, you just have fun with it. Nothing to take too seriously. So, yeah. This is definitely a true love letter to 1990s gamers, arcade gamers, people who love fighting games, people who love arcade games, beat 'em ups, and especially those who love the PC Engine. And what I also enjoyed is that, the anime also portrays of like how the Sega Saturn was actually kind of a big thing in Japan. Like, even though the Saturn was never really a thing outside of Japan, and of course that's an entirely different story by itself, but the fact that it was a big thing in Japan, it kind of makes me like, hey, you know what, hopefully this anime will showcase an international audience who've never had any exposure or never grew up on the Saturn, because like, hey, maybe I'd like to try that console and see, the good games that has to offer, especially as it pertains to its Japanese library. And of course, it shows like, hey, there are also some big Super Street Fighter tournaments going on in Osaka at the time, and that was also very true. You can actually find videos of these actual tournaments on YouTube, and it makes sense that they have these tournaments in Osaka because that's where Capcom is located. And it kind of also shows like, hey, there's a particular code to unlock Akuma or Goki when you get to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And it also talks about, let's say, certain tactics, like for example, like how you use guile in a very counter defensive sense. Like, it's called machigairu in Japanese, like machi being waiting. It's sort of like, a bit, when you play as guile, since he uses charge attacks, like you can like bait your opponent into you, and then use his charge attacks against the opponent. I think there's an actual term of it in English, but in Japanese, as I said before, it's called machigairu, and I think that's a really interesting term. So yeah, put the simplistic art style aside. Enjoy it for its simple, its fun story. Enjoy what it was in the 1990s. Especially in Japan, or maybe as it relates to your home country, and go back memory lane. Or for those of you who are born after this, for you younger folks, you kind of get an idea of what life was like, before smartphones, what the arcade gaming scene was like.